live?
Yes.
Hey everyone. Bailey here. Great, it's all working. Happy spring, happy May. I know everyone's super busy running around, planting, getting those plugs in the ground the minute they arrive. So good morning to my friends on the West Coast, and good afternoon to you on the East Coast. And good evening to those of us who are already experiencing 5 p.m. over here, well, in Portugal. I'm enjoying a Pomelo Old Fashioned made by Thomas today, so delicious. In a few hours you can have one too. So today we're going to talk about, I don't know, it might be a little bit boring for some people, but when you really think about your business, you need your flowers to last and to be fresh. These are crucial points that really can't be skipped. So we're going to talk all about post-harvest handling, some about actually harvest stage. I want your questions. If there's a crop that you are having trouble with, let me know. I can't go through every crop there is today, but if you tell me what's going on with something that you're growing, we can talk about it. I'm going to talk in general terms about common techniques, solutions, products that you should be thinking about using, okay? I could just read you, got a story hour here, Post-Harvest Handling of Cut Flowers and Greens. You need this book. If you don't have this book, the ASCFG puts this out. If you're not a member of the ASCFG, you should be, and they can help you get this book. I assume it's still in print. If not, I'm sure it'll be back in print shortly. The team there are also people that you'll meet at most ASCFG meetings. I've really done a lot of research and compiled a lot of resources for you all in one book. So that's a really great first place to start. I'm not actually going to read it to you today. I've worked with flowers enough that I have a good sense of what flowers need to succeed. So let's just get going. All right, so what are the goals? Ask me your questions. Also, if you have a question that you are maybe a little timid about asking, maybe you're brand new and you don't understand the terminology, or you're a little shy, just send that as a DM, just send a message to us. Felicia's standing by, she'll get that message to me. And you can even say, hey, don't use my name, please, I'm new. We've all been new. There's a lot to learn about flower farming as a business and just gardening as a hobby. So we don't judge here, we're here to help. That's 100% why I'm here today, is because I want to help you do better at this whole thing, the whole activity and business of flower farming. Okay, so the goals of post-harvest care. Why do we care? Well, you want your flower to last as long as possible. You want it to get to your customer in the freshest state possible. Now that depends a little bit on your market. And if you're selling directly to your retail customer, I recommend you get them the freshest flower possible. So they, if they buy it at your Saturday farmer's market, I loved it when people would come the next Saturday and say, I don't actually need flowers this week because my ones from last week are still looking great. Now, of course, business-wise, I would love if all flowers would die at, midnight Friday night so that the customer would purchase again on Saturday. But longevity is what we go for here. It's a sign of quality. It's a sign that you're doing what you should be doing. Now, if you're selling to an event florist, they might not care as much. You can sell them things that are a little more open because they don't need to last as long. But just be clear with your event florist that, hey, this has 3 days left in it, or just keep those lines of communication open. My goal was always to deliver the freshest product cut at the proper stage and handled properly after cutting. It's just really good business practice. You'll become known as the person who sells fresh flowers. I think fresh is the first word we all think of when we are talking about flowers. So your first trick is to harvest that flower or foliage at the proper stage. And that's going to depend a lot on the crop. So feel free to ask individual questions about proper harvest stage. It's all detailed in this book. For a thing like a snapdragon, that's usually when a third of the flowers are open. There's a lot of flowers where having a third of the florets open is a really good stage to harvest the whole stem. You might have things like eucalyptus that wilt a little bit early in the season, but they last later in the season. So it can be a matter of maturity. They might just need to stay on the plant for another 4, 5, 6 weeks until they're ready. The best way to figure this out is to just try it. When we had the full farm, I was cutting all the time, little bunches of flowers behind me. I'm just trying out my current sweet peas. We had them all over the house. The house kind of looked like a funeral home most of the time because we just had so many flowers around. But I really wanted to see how things are lasting in real life conditions. You must have a cooler. Anna Jane at Little State Flower Farm is correct. If you ever hear her speak, she will tell you that if you don't have a cooler, you don't have any business in this game. I would say by your second year, you have to have one. You can learn a lot your first year without a cooler, but if you're going to sell to people, you need to be able to maintain the freshness of your product. Now, we started with, 2 or 3 or 4 house refrigerators, from Craigslist, from side of the road. We had, on Thursday, Friday, our own fridge in the house would become overflowing with flowers. Eventually, we built a walk-in cooler with, air conditioners and cool bots, and that was just the biggest, smartest thing. And yes, I was a little late doing it, but, we were figuring out other ways. If you have access to a normal household refrigerator, that can work temporarily, but you'll fill that up a lot faster than you imagine. So one of the first things you should be investing in is a cooler that can hold a lot of flowers and make it twice as big as you think you might need it, okay? The next most important thing is hygiene when you're talking about post-harvest. Bacteria is the enemy of cut flowers, and as are fungi. So your cooler itself needs to be clean. You need to be scrubbing that cooler down, occasionally, maybe every month, with bleach or some kind of disinfectant, at least once a season, but more is better. But your buckets, you must have sparkling buckets. If you aren't willing to eat out of your bucket, then it's not clean enough. They really should be scrubbed after every use. Same with your vases. Any container that flowers go in must just be sparkling. I can't overstate that enough. If you have water in your vase that goes cloudy, that's bacteria. And the first thing that bacteria does is just clog up the cut end of your stem, and then the flowers wilt. So there's just no way around it. You must have hygienic conditions, okay? So to the other end of that, so what kills flowers? Well, heat kills flowers. The flowers are alive, they're metabolizing, they're transpiring. Transpiration is where a plant is taking up water, from the roots or after it's been cut, just through the cut end of the stem, and releasing water through the petals, through the leaves. But they're also, they're respiring just like you and I are. They take in, they're burning carbohydrates. They're living things, and the goal is to keep them alive as long as possible. So in the heat, they transpire faster. That decreases the longevity of that flower, and that's why we keep things in the cooler. The cooler also minimizes bacterial growth. So, even if you have clean water and there's a little bit of bacteria going in there, a cold environment will slow that down. The other thing we need to think about is ethylene. Ethylene is a gas. It's a plant hormone. It's everywhere, okay? Plants talk to, one side of a plant will talk to another plant, will talk to the same plant planted over there. There's a lot of really interesting books about how trees communicate with each other. A lot of this is through hormones, especially those that are gaseous. So ethylene is a gas. It travels in the environment. We know it mostly as a ripening agent for fruits. So if you pick a tomato that's a little bit green, or peaches that are a little hard, you put them in a paper bag. That's to trap ethylene because it's going to help that fruit ripen. Bananas are the kind of classic example. Ethylene also triggers a plant, like a tree, in the fall when it's time to drop its leaves. Or it tells a plant, drop your petals, the flower has done its job. Ethylene will also destroy a lot of cut flowers. There are a lot of cut flowers that are very sensitive to ethylene, and they will prematurely end the life of your flowers. One of the prime examples, one of the most ethylene sensitive crops would be sweet peas. Now we've just kind of picked our first round of sweet peas here in Madeira. I'm very happy. I'll tell you that we selected the property because I thought I could grow sweet peas here. So it's nice to see that they are working. If you don't treat your sweet peas against ethylene, they're going to last about 3 days. But if you're willing to go through the process of treating them to prevent ethylene damage, they can last a week to 10 days. So it's a huge difference in who you can sell that flower to and how happy they're going to be once they have the product in their hand, in their house. Okay, we'll talk about all of this a little bit more, but so the big killers of flowers: ethylene, heat, and bacteria or fungi. I'm going to sort of just pathogens. We'll put them all in one loop. Ethylene is also less damaging at lower temperatures. So there's another reason for a cooler. You might have some ethylene in your cooler, but it is much more dangerous or much more harmful to your plants when they are warm, or your flowers when they are warm. Okay, I'm a big proponent of using various potions. I'll call them magic potions. These are post-harvest solutions. They're available commercially. One brand is called Chrysal, Chrysal. It's a Dutch brand. I'll just speak about their products mostly because they are the ones that I have used most often. This is a large company with a lot of people doing a lot of research into specific protocols for each and every kind of cut flower crop out there. It's not haphazard. It's not, I don't know, you probably heard, put some Sprite in the water, put an aspirin in the water, maybe a penny if it's tulips. That's just kind of word of mouth misinformation. Chrysal has the science to back up their products. Floral Life is another company that makes similar products. I'll speak more about the Chrysal products just because I know them. Your basic flower food that you get in a little packet, it's a combination of several things. It's sugar, it's an antibacterial, and it's an acid. The sugar is because this is a living thing that is still actively growing. A lot of flowers we cut still have buds to open. They're still using sugar. And part of what the leaves are doing out in the sunshine is making carbohydrates and sugars so that the plant can flower. So you chop this thing off from its roots, it's no longer able to, it's not photosynthesizing if you have it inside. It can't get the goodness from the roots anymore. So you need to be able to give that back to the plant. Clear water is great. Clean water will always work for a couple days. But if you're talking about actual longevity, you need to be thinking about a flower food, and all flower foods are primarily sugar. The antibacterial is simply something to keep the bacteria from growing. As I mentioned earlier, bacteria will clog those stems, make your flowers wilt, make everything smell bad, and give you a bad name. The other element is usually something like a citric acid. Now again, these are all proprietary formulas. They don't tell you exactly what's in them, but common knowledge is that it's sugar, antibacterial, and an acid. The acid, with a more acidic solution, again, the bacteria cannot grow as readily, so it just helps to slow the growth of bacteria. So there's several kinds of solutions. You might hear people talk about the holding solution. Chrysal number 2 that's just what they call it. The holding solution is just something that you might harvest your flowers from, into the field, into a bucket of food, and put them in the cooler. They can hang out in that solution for a while. The sugars are just going to, be taken up by the stem. It's nothing too dramatic. We'll talk about a consumer solution later. So a higher sugar solution would be a consumer solution, and that's going to really help force the flowers open quickly. But holding solution is really what it sounds like. It's meant to hold them while they're in the cooler. Just keep them fresh, keep them fed, get them ready to go to market. Now, what Chrysal calls their professional number 3 is what I would call a consumer solution. It's the same stuff that's in those little packets that I always gave to my flower customers at farmers markets, or that you might find at the supermarket or the florist. That's a higher sugar solution because you want that rose to open. You want those lily buds to keep opening. You want lisianthus to keep developing. Same with snapdragons. There's a lot of crops that we cut just a little bit immature so that they can open for the customer. You get to enjoy the growth of that tulip every day and the expansion of the petals. That's half of the fun of having flowers in the house to me. So if you do nothing else, at least get some holding solution. I also recommend having the commercial, the consumer solution on hand to give to your customers. There might be instances where you are trying to get a certain crop open faster for your florist customer, and then you might want to put it in that, number 3 solution, the consumer solution. But in general, the holding solution might be about enough for you. There's another solution called a quick dip. It tends to have a lot of alcohol in it, I think. Quick dip is for crops that are really prone to wilting. You really just dip them in. You can also use it on gerbers and roses, things that are prone to having a little bit of a hard time drinking. It's really just alcohol. It disinfects the cut end of the stem, opens things up so it's ready to drink. We have another solution called a hydrator, and you might guess it's something that helps the flower to hydrate. It's mostly an alcohol. It has probably a lot of acid in it as well. It opens up those stems. You keep it in there for a couple hours at most. It really just helps get that first drink of water up into the stems. You generally don't store your flowers in it. You would start it in the hydrator and then move them over to a holding solution. Now there's a little technical term. If you start a crop in one solution and then move it to another, they call that pulsing. So it's just getting kind of a pulse of one solution for a defined amount of time, and then you switch it to a holding solution. There are some other products that are specifically for bulbs. Lilies, tulips. If they're stored for too long, you start to see some yellowing on the leaves. Lilies will start to lose their lower leaves. There are bulb-specific foods that help keep the leaves green and help keep them attached to the flower, which gives you a longer sales window and also gives the appearance of freshness to your customer. Another product that you might encounter with some regularity, you might hear them called Gerbera tablets. They're really just little tiny chlorine pills. You mostly hear people using them for zinnias, because zinnias have that kind of light fur on them. They get a little sticky, and they're prone to kind of messing up the water pretty fast. So those Gerbera tablets are great for Gerbera daisies. They're great for zinnias. Maybe sunflowers also have that kind of hairy stem that's a little hard to keep clean. Anything where you've seen the water turn foul quickly, you might consider using these little chlorine tablets. You can get all of this from Kreisel. Kreisel, you can find them online. They're a Dutch company. They have an outpost in Miami. They're happy to talk with you and give you guides so you can see what all the products do. I really do see a difference. I've done a lot of tests side by side with just plain water versus a solution, and the solutions definitely work. I'm just gonna pop over and answer a couple questions real fast. The name of the book that I'm talking about again, so if you want to get a screenshot, let me just hold this up. So it's Post-Harvest Handling of Cut Flowers and Greens. Okay, John Dole is a researcher, professor at NC State, a really smart man. He's the lead author on this, as well as some other familiar names to the Association of Specialty Cut Flower Growers. I can't say enough about this book. A lot of us are waiting for this for a long time, and it's finally out. It really kind of just goes crop by crop by crop, telling you which things are especially ethylene sensitive, stage of harvest. There's a lot of work going on in post-harvest care, including some research right now of storing peonies below freezing, so you could store them for many, many, many months. I'm really excited to see what happens with that. Okay, got another question here. Is there a trick to knowing what should go in the cooler versus what should not? Something other than a list to memorize. Well, the big one that comes to mind would be zinnias. People have trouble if you're taking your zinnia from a 100-degree field and put it in a 38-degree cooler. You get some blackening of the leaves, maybe a little bit of wilting. Basil's another one that's, if you're growing basil for a cut flower, they tend to be very cold sensitive. So those are crops you might having a cooler that's, 55 degrees. Generally, the more tropical something is, depending on where it's come from in the world, the less, or the more sensitive to cool temperatures it's going to be. If you go to a floral wholesaler, they'll keep their orchids and the proteas and things from warmer places in in a 55-degree cooler rather than a 38-degree cooler. Zinnias and basil are the two big ones. Maybe celosia, but I think really you just keep zinnias and basil out, you'll be okay. But if you have something that's really truly tropical, like an actual plant from the tropics, those are ones that I would just be a little cautious about putting them in the cooler. All right, I'm going to go back to my talk here. There's some good questions. Yeah, keep sending the questions on over. Any crop you're having trouble with, I'll try to help you. I can't promise that I know everything, but I'm trying to give you things to think about. Okay, we talked about the magic potions. I'm going to talk about one magic potion that might be a little controversial, and that would be silverthiosulfate. Now that is the product that will prevent ethylene damage. It's a derivative of silver, and it, inside every plant there's little receptors for different, hormones and chemicals, whatever. The plants that are susceptible to ethylene damage, those receptors are wide open and ready for ethylene to attach and tell them, let's fall apart. If you ever have like Delphinium, that when you shake it, all the petals fall off, that's ethylene. So what the silverthiosulfate does at very, very, very tiny concentrations is it attaches to all those receptors so that there's no place for the ethylene to go. So the ethylene might be looking for a place to attach, but there is no place for it to attach. Silverthiosulfate is industry standard worldwide. Anything coming from Holland and South America probably has been treated with silverthiosulfate. So why is it a sticky subject? Well, it's a heavy metal. We shouldn't just be dumping heavy metals in the water, in our groundwater. It got a really bad name because it's a standard chemical in photo processing. So back when we were all, taking our canisters of film, I took mine to Kmart, I don't know where you took yours, and they would send them off, to these big facilities that would develop them and send them back. Especially black and white, but also color film used a lot of silver. And back in the day, they were just dumping this into rivers, into groundwater. It was not being disposed of with care. So if you're going to use an anti-ethylene product like silverthiosulfate, you need to follow the directions. Any solution that is left, you must capture that. You can't put it in the drain. It comes with I think it's called a flocculant, which will help precipitate the silver out of solution. The directions are all there. It's easy to use. It's easy to do it well, but you can't just be dumping that on the ground. If you're not precise enough to use a product like this, then either don't grow ethylene sensitive crops or just accept that they're not going to last very long. So I think it's worth looking into. I think it can be handled very safely, but again, it's not for everyone. There's another chemical, another product, it's ethylene block or ethyl block, I think. It is another kind of gas. So you'd have to treat your cooler or treat a product when it's in a box, in an enclosed space. And I found that's a little difficult to manage sometimes. So if you are looking for an ethylene treatment for very sensitive crops, I think a silverthiosulfate based product is the way to go. Chrysal AVB is their brand name. Again, refer to them for, for all the directions on how to actually use it. It's like one drop in a liter of water, and then that will treat just many thousands of plants or flowers. So it takes a very small amount to make a very big difference. All right, there's some other products that just depending on other crops, that just depending on how you treat them, you're going to get better life. If I'm having trouble with, some kind of woody stem, I remember 9-bark, for instance, I might cut it earlier in the season and it would get a little wilty. One thing to do is cut them in the morning when the plant hasn't started to transpire. It's been drinking water all night. Everything is just really hydrated. So cutting wilty things first is often a really good idea, especially if you get them right into the cooler. Now, if you have 20 things to cut and you cut the wilty thing first and then you leave it out in the sunshine, well, you probably made it worse for that crop. If you if you take a stem and put it, immediately cut it into its holding solution and put it into the cooler, that plant has a much better chance of becoming fully hydrated. Now think about if you're out in the sunshine on a really hot day, maybe it's windy and also hot, you are losing moisture at a rapid rate. You're sweating, it's evaporating off your skin, you're losing water, you're dehydrating moment by moment. The same goes for your flowers. So on a hot, dry day with wind, your things are going to dry out really fast. So the opposite of that would be cool in the cooler. There's really very little wind in the cooler. You might have a little light air movement. And it's generally quite humid in there. So a flower cannot transpire very quickly in the cooler. So cutting something and keeping it even for 24 hours in your cooler in water might be enough hydrating to then hold that plant for another week. So if you're having trouble with something wilting, try cutting it and putting it in the cooler in water or in in a holding solution overnight. That might fix the problem. Now I'm going to talk about poppies, which we get a lot of questions this time of year. In the last couple of weeks we have. I think some of you are probably getting a little bit warm for poppies right now, but northern growers are probably just hitting their stride. There are a number of crops, like poppies for one, euphorbia comes to mind, that have a milky sap. You cut the stem and they want to bleed. But let's talk specifically about poppies. There's a whole lot of ideas out there about how you have to, sear or burn the ends of your poppies. Some people tell you to put them in hot water, but I'll tell you what actually works. So yes, they do have a latex, kind of a milky sap. When you cut them, that will start dripping out. If you put them in water, it'll just keep dripping out it might just keep dripping out until the whole flower collapses. So you want to seal that in the stem. The thing that always confused me is if I'm sealing the end of the stem, how is it drinking? Well, a lot of flowers can actually drink through the outsides of their stem. Sweet peas are a great example. When we were raising sweet peas commercially, I almost never recut them because I knew if I put them in water, they can drink through the outside of the stem. The florist would eventually cut them to size. They would get a fresh cut at some point in their life. But a lot of flowers can drink through the outside of the stem. Poppies are one of these flowers. So what you want to do is seal the cut end and then put them in, when you're ready, put them in water. So another trick, you don't have to burn them. You can just cut that stem and put it in a box in your cooler. It will naturally kind of make a scab over the cut end of the stem. That latex seals over, it seals up the stem, then that flower is sealed. If you put them in a cardboard box, it keeps the humidity up so they aren't continuing to dehydrate. But you can store those things dry for probably 5 or 6 days. Now, I'm sure you learned that you need to cut your poppies every morning. Right when you see a little bit of color, we call that color crack stage, when you see inside the pod, or the bud rather. Cut that stem, lay it in a cardboard box in your cooler. Then the night before you need them, stand them up in water or a holding solution in your cooler. They will drink slowly overnight. The water will enter the outside of the stem. They'll be really perky and ready to go for the next morning. And we found that they would all start opening at the same time. So Friday afternoon, one of the things we would do is make our poppy bunches from these dry poppies that we've been picking all week. Stand them up in a bucket of holding solution. And then by Saturday morning markets, they were just at the perfect stage. They weren't broken, the petals were still attached. And then throughout the morning, as the sun warmed up the farmer's market, the poppy bunches would become more and more beautiful. And we really couldn't sell enough of them. So there's my tricks for poppies. One other trick you might have, if you've ever worked in a flower shop, roses, can be a good idea to cut the rose underwater. So say this is a water level, you stick the stem in and cut it beneath. And what you're doing there is preventing air from getting in the vascular tissue. An air bubble can almost act like it can clog the stem, and the plant doesn't, has no way to get rid of that air bubble once it gets in. So things like roses, things like gerberas that might be a little bit wilty, you could try cutting them underwater. Again, something like a quick dip or a hydrator may also help. but not as much as just good hygiene and keeping things as cool as possible. All right. Oh, good. Got a nice bunch of questions here. Chinese forget-me-nots are dropping petals. Perhaps someone else who's grown Chinese forget-me-nots more can chime in. So when you hear dropping petals is always an ethylene response. So you could, I don't know if, not every crop is in this book. I'm not sure if Chinese forget-me-nots are. So it's probably some kind of ethylene issue. You could try cutting them earlier, maybe when the first little flower opens would be a good time to open them. Putting them in a higher sugar solution sometimes can help. Just having those extra carbohydrates will often keep the petals more attached to the flower. Thank you, Shanti. Shanti at Whipstone Farm says, dispel all the myths, please. I'm trying, Shanti. Thank you. If you have any suggestions, just let me know. Okay. Suggestions for getting jasmine to last other than dipping the ends in boiling water. I've cut it at a young new growth as well as older woody stems. So, yes, Anne, I think you are correct. Sometimes there's a difference in maturity. So if something is wilting, it might be too immature to actually last. So try it at a later stage. It sounds like you did that. Woody stems especially can be tricky to hydrate. So I might consider using a hydrator for a couple hours, a hydrating solution specifically for the purpose of opening those stems up. I would also consider keeping something like jasmine in the cooler overnight or even 24 hours to give it a better chance of becoming fully hydrated. Okay, Sunseeker Flowers asked about the silver ethylene treatment. Again, that's silverthiosulfate. How to use it, where do you buy it? You might be able to find it somewhere like Amazon. I would recommend that you go directly to Kreisel. They should be able to get it for you. The regulations change a bit state by state. It's a safe enough formulation that it can be listed for all states, but there just isn't a demand in all states. And there's a process for getting such products labeled in all states. So I would definitely just check with the Kreisel company directly, and they can tell you how they can help you. All right. Best average temperature for a cooler. I always kept mine around 38 and 37 was great. If you're running it too close to 33, 34, then you don't have a lot of room for error if it drops a little further. Any of us who've been working in flowers for a while have had that moment where you reach for the bridal bouquet an hour before delivery, and you've had it too close to the compressor and your roses are frozen. It's not something anyone wants to do. So 38 is a fairly safe temperature. I recommend having a lot of thermometers in your cooler, link them to your phone so you can check it, set an alarm. We don't want to freeze our flowers. It doesn't happen very often, but I have had it happen to me, and I just don't like it. But 38 is a good solid temperature for most crops. Kim's Best Life Flowers. Is it true that zinnias cannot be refrigerated? Kim, a lot of people will say they cannot. A lot of people have experienced damage from refrigerating zinnias. Now I gotta say, when we grew them in Vermont, I would put them in the cooler and see no damage. So it could be that we were growing them under already cool conditions. I gotta say, they weren't the happiest, they weren't the tallest. You all in the South get these giant zinnias that just grow like mad. I would have to try really hard to get one good flush of zinnias up in northern Vermont. So I think it's more about the temperature differential. If you're going from 100 or more degrees into a cold cooler, I think that's when zinnias are going to get hurt. So be cautious. I know some people do make a mixed bouquet that includes zinnias and they put them in the cooler and they seemingly don't have trouble. I also have seen plenty of people that get black mushy leaves if they put zinnias in the cooler. So there's a temperature at which it will work. Maybe it's 45, maybe it's 55. If zinnias are a big crop for you, it would be worth having a second cooler for them, or maybe you just put them in the coolest place out of the cooler that you have. Best practices for rehydrating tulips after they are stored in the fridge with bulbs on. I used to do this when we grew tulips in Vermont. I would pull them out with the bulb, and I would get 2 or 3 weeks. I would usually store them in a big feed bag. You know, we had a lot of chickens and goats and pigs at that time, so we had a lot of 50-pound feed bags, and that was great especially for the taller varieties. What I would do is wrap them before hydrating them. You know, tulips, if they're a little wilty, they're going to be a little bit floppy. So I'd wrap them nice and tight, and then cut off those bulbs, and then I would put them in a bulb-specific food. Like I said, Chrysal has a number of bulb food options. They're really just a sugar, an antibacterial, and an acid. But there's something in there that helps the leaves to stay green. You start seeing green or yellowing leaves on tulips often enough. And then I would hydrate those in the cooler overnight. The next morning they're ready to sell. They're really firm. The buds are starting to swell, and they'll continue to develop. Rewild Flower Farm, Hibiscus Mahogany Splendor suggestions. How to prevent wilt, especially after adjusting length for final cut in bouquets. I've grown this before in Vermont where I was never happy. I could hardly get it more than 12 inches. I've used it from more southerly growers before where it gets to be a hedge. So that stuff grows very fast, very tall. I think it's a maturity issue with Mahogany Splendor. It's going to be a lot better later in the season when all those leaves have had a chance to really get firm. Again, you can put it in the cooler overnight. I never had any trouble with cold damage on that type of hibiscus. But I've also had it last 3 and 4 or 5 weeks if it's happy. So I would maybe just wait a little later in the season. I think that might be your main issue. And then hydrate it overnight in your cooler. Right, the Bloom Flower Farm asks if sweet peas are cut dry like poppies. No. We were raising 15 or 20,000 sweet pea plants at a time, so I do know my sweet peas. I would always cut sweet peas directly into a silverthiosulfate solution. Keep them in the shade, and then I would get them into the cooler within an hour of being cut. After about 2 hours, I would transfer them into not a holding solution, but I would actually use like the Chrysal number 3, a commercial or a consumer solution that has higher sugar. That higher sugar really helps sweet peas in particular to last. So I would go from a silverthiosulfate solution into a high sugar solution, and I would keep them in cups of water even up until delivery time. When we would ship them to, we were supplying 28th Street in New York City, I would put them in a little baggie of like a flour gel, so they still had access to water. They really don't want to dry out. Oh, my friend Mark Sardi up in Montreal is watching. What would you suggest to keep Delphinium, to help Delphinium keep their petals aside from the silver solution? A higher sugar solution might help. Delphinium is one of those very ethylene sensitive crops. If ethylene attacks it, which it will, ethylene is everywhere. It's in our homes, especially. We'll move on a tangent here. What kind of drives me nuts is that almost all flower departments in grocery stores are near the fruit. And fruit is what's giving off the ethylene. So you're going to find the highest concentrations of ethylene right beside the flowers. So that tells you that those flowers have all been treated because they aren't falling apart. Silverthiosulfate is really the only thing that's going to help Delphinium keep its petals on when you see them shedding. That is an ethylene response. Higher sugar can sometimes counteract or can mitigate the effects of ethylene, but eventually they're going to drop their petals. There's just no way around it. So, using them a little fresher, maybe while you still have more buds and fewer open flowers, giving them a good shake before they go into your design work. Or you can just learn to embrace the beautiful blue falling petals over here. Question from Little Hen Flowers. What flower do you have the most trouble growing? I mean, that's going to be different for everyone. I personally had the most trouble growing dahlias back when we were farming in Vermont. We had the wrong weather, the wrong bugs, a short season. they just weren't, they didn't work for me. My friends Dave and Hillary, a couple towns over, do beautiful work with dahlias. So that's just going to be a trial and error. Figure out what works for you and do more of that. What flowers do you recommend that last a long time in the cooler? We have a very small farm, but invested in a cooler, and they want to get the most use out of it. Sunseeker flowers, good job. I know it is an investment. It pays for itself really quickly if you think about it. Back when I didn't have a cooler, I would only go out on Friday and cut whatever was fresh. Anything that had gone by, that became compost. So really, I was only harvesting, 1/7 of what I was growing, because I would only take the freshest stuff to market. But if you can sell 100% of what you're growing, well, that's a whole lot more flowers you can sell just by having that cooler. So it will pay for itself. Things that last a long time. I've kept stock in the cooler for more than a week. Certainly Lisianthus for up to a couple weeks. Tulips, if you pull them out with the bulb on, you can have you can get a good 2-3 weeks of extra life out of tulips. Lilies, I stored for at least 10 days in the cooler. Those I would keep dry in a closed box. As I mentioned, poppies can be stored for up to a week. I'm happy to answer specific questions. These are just some that come to mind. Any foliage, berries, they all hold really quite well in the cooler. A lot of that does come down to the proper harvest stage, but almost anything can be held for up to a week. If you think about all the stuff that's transported across the world, most of that has been cut a week or 10 days before it reaches its final destination. The Bloom Flower Farm asked about cutting tools. Is a knife really better? I'm hesitant because I need all my fingers. I think you should use whatever works for you. I never harvested with a knife. I would design with a knife because I could see what was going on. It's just second nature. But I always used, I tended to use clippers in the field, or there's a lot of crops that you can pull or snap. If you can figure out how to harvest it without a tool, that will save some time and save your fingers. All right. Question from Barbara, not related to Postharvest. Is there any research being done on fusarium-resistant Lisianthus varieties? I've tried all the non-chemical preventive methods, but still lose a lot. I will say that 100% of the Lisianthus breeders are trying to breed for fusarium resistance. Some of them are getting better, but none of them are immune yet. It's hard to take something and make it do exactly what the opposite of what its nature is. So yes, and that is, when I talk with Lisianthus breeders, that's a very specific concern and something that everyone wants to fix. All right, someone in northern Alabama here lost some camellias this winter, probably with that. I think there was some unseasonal cold snaps. Camellias, which I'm getting to know here because we have them in our yard for the first time. They are nice cut foliage, but if you lose them, what would be a good evergreen to replace? I don't know. Magnolia. I know it's more of a Christmas feel to it, bigger leaves. Let me think about that. If I come up with anything, we'll get back in touch with you. Or if anyone else has a good idea for evergreen foliage for warmer climates. I wish we had more foliage options. Annual foliages would be great, but there's just not that many that are ready to cut early in the season. Most of them seem to want to be harvested later. All right. Someone is asking about the birds here in the background. Yes, it's a canary. I have a handful of canaries. Here they can be kept out on your patio. They don't have to be in the house because it's warm enough all year long. So I've always been a bit of a bird brain, and I've gotten back into canaries. So maybe we'll bring one out to show you sometime. All right. Some on Jasper House Farm. I have trouble using some David Austin roses in handheld bouquets or dry handheld bouquets. A couple varieties that usually wilt. That can be down to just the structure of the petal. It's not thick enough. Commercial cut flower varieties have been bred for their holding ability. My only suggestion would be, try to use them a little tighter. There are certainly products like Crowning Glory, which it's almost a wax that gives you an extra coating on top of the petals, helps reduce that transpiration rate. But on a hot, sunny day, it's almost impossible to keep some flowers from wilting if they are out of water. Maybe just gonna be trial and error. Like you mentioned that some hold better than others. I think that's going to be a trial and error situation. Grace Bloom Farm, do you store in plain water in the cooler or using a holding formula for cut flowers? I use a holding solution such as Chrysal number 2. Maybe you joined us later. If you go back to the beginning of this video, I talk a lot about that. Again, that's just getting sugar into the stem to help it last longer. Any way to get Lisianthus buds to open the color they should be? Mine are always white. One way would be just to cut them a little bit later. I always find you have one open Lisianthus flower, and then the next flower is going to open true to color, and then the next ones are going to start fading. So cutting them a little bit later when more are closer to open would help. And then using a holding solution or even a commercial solution with more sugar. Those pigments also take carbohydrates to manufacture for the flower. So a higher sugar concentration might help you get more color on your plants. All right. I think that's about it. Oh, I forgot to say, I was in Israel last week visiting Danziger cut flowers. Now, they were the producers of the Scoop Scabiosa. I first started working with them about 6 years ago to bring the Scoops to America. They're also the top breeder of baby's breath in the world. Skylar Veronica, some beautiful Solidago and Hypericum, some incredible Status and Limonium. So I'm excited to show you some of the new products. So we'll show you some of these things on Instagram this week of what I saw in Israel, things that we're gonna work on getting probably for the 2024 season. But they're really great partners and really wonderful to work with, getting these top-notch commercial varieties into the hands of small and medium-sized growers in America. So I've got a little note here, back to Barbara about Fusarium. There's an interesting study about growing mustard as a biofumigant to help manage Fusarium. I talked about that in Israel with Danziger. They've also done some such things. If you're chemical averse, which I also am, that might be something to consider, where you grow this mustard crop, you chop it up on top of the surface, put a tarp down. So essentially a mustard gas goes into the soil and kills the Fusarium. It's not going to be 100%, but it might do some good for you. We have information about that on our blog. We'll soon have a blog post kind of just hitting the highlights of what I've talked about today. Just the basics of proper harvesting and post-harvest. Again, I can't recommend this book enough. The Chrysal Company will also send you some guides on what they've learned in terms of what crops need which treatments. So there are resources out there. If you're having trouble with a crop, just keep trying and researching that particular crop, and you will figure it out. It'll become second nature. Right, in 2 weeks, we're going to be back talking with Lennie Larkin. If you've been around the ASCFG, you certainly know Lennie. Maybe you follow B-Side Flower Farms. She's in the process of writing a really helpful book on just the business of profitable cut flower farming. So we're going to ask her to share her wisdom with us. If you have questions about business-specific questions, make sure you let me know. But we'll have a nice chat with Lennie about her new project and resources she has to help you decide which crops are profitable for you. All right, I'm going to sign off in 1 second. I just see 2 more questions that have popped up. How important is water temperature when initially harvesting? I'm not going to boil my water to get it up to a certain temperature. When you have hundreds and hundreds of gallons of water needed for harvest day, That's just not a possibility. So I think room temperature is great, or whatever comes out of your faucet is probably fine. I don't know of a crop that is so sensitive that you cannot use just standard room or air temperature water. I know some people harvest dahlias into boiling water. Scientifically, I don't know why you do that. Maybe it works, but I've never needed to do that. We've got Rabbit Crest Farm, Baby's Breath. What's the best stage to cut Million Stars? We talked about that in Israel last week, and generally their commercial growers are cutting Baby's Breath when there's just a couple flowers open. And then they're opening it inside for another 5 days to a week before it is shipped. I think that's so that flowers aren't sitting out in the sun open where they can get rained on or they can start to turn brown. If you have them under a dry cover, they're not going to get dew on those open petals. Again, they're treating with a silverthiosulfate solution and then into a sugar type holding solution while those flowers develop. So don't be afraid to cut your Baby's Breath when just those first couple flowers are open. And last question, any tips on Astrantia? I don't have tips on Astrantia other than maybe it was cut a little young. I did notice when I grew Astrantia, the younger blooms tended to not hydrate as well as something cut even a few days later. All right, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. As always, email us with your questions, info@farmerbailey.com, and we will see you in a couple weeks.